Welcome to the Mental Health Merienda, your snack-sized guide for mental health wellness. I'm Dr. Adeline Leon, licensed clinical psychologist specializing in neuropsychology.
And I'm Michelle Young, licensed clinical social worker. So, for today's episode, we're going to talk about parenting. And parenting is a tough job. Wouldn't you agree, Adeline?
I'm not a parent myself, but it looks hard.
So parenting is tough. It's something we don't learn in school. And it's also something like children don't come with like a manual or any instructions. So you have to kind of figure it out. And then more often than not, parents usually tend to revert to a parenting style that they were raised with, unless you make a conscious effort to do something different.
And while there's no single right way to parent, experts have identified several distinct parenting styles that can influence a child's development and behavior. And being aware of these styles can help you reflect on your own approach and help you find a balanced method that works for you and your family. And so we'll be going through some of those today. And I'll admit I'm not a parent. My knowledge about parenting is a bit limiting, but Michelle has a degree in child development. And so I think, Michelle, I think you're a good person to really help guide us through this topic.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. And I love talking about parenting and child development. And actually, learning about child development kind of had this nice side effect of helping me via, helping me with my parenting. Not that you need to take like a child development class or have a degree in it to be a good parent, but it does help to know child development and those things. And then also, these types of parenting styles that we're going to go over were actually taught when I was in grad school. So these are what experts have identified as your standard styles of parenting.
Yeah, so you have the book knowledge from your master's in child development and also the practical knowledge from actually being a parent yourself. So
right. So let's kind of get into it. So the first parenting style that we'll talk about is called authoritarian parenting. So this type of parenting style, think drill sergeant, think what I say goes type of parent. So authoritarian parents tend to believe that their child should follow the rules without exception. So there's no negotiating with the child. It's, again, like what I say goes. So this type of parenting style is characterized by high levels of structure and discipline and low levels of warmth. So this is kind of how this parenting style may present. So think parents who are kind of demanding of what they want their child to do, and then also often are more prone to using punishment. Having high expectations of their child, having high expectations that they take responsibility. Again, no time for a child to negotiate or for their opinion. Again, it's what I say goes as a parent. And then think also they provide very absolutes. So if a child asks, why can't I go to my friend's house? Because I said so. Because I'm the grown-up. I'm cutting you off. We're not having that discussion. It's just, you just have to listen to me. Clean up your room or else. Like you're kind of resorting to that punishment, that corporal punishment, drill sergeant type vibe in this parenting style. So there are some potentially negative outcomes for this type of parenting style, as you can probably kind of see in the examples that we're giving. So sometimes what happens is that children who grow up in this environment, they end up being very obedient and following directions, but they're doing so out of necessity. It's not because they've built in internally that that's how they should behave. Kids might follow the rules, but there's a risk of having low self-esteem. And then also with low self-esteem, some mental health concerns like depression and anxiety, things like that.
do you think it's because kids in these parenting style, like they feel like their opinions don't matter, and so that's why they have low self-esteem? Like they feel like, oh, like my parents never asked me my opinion, so nobody cares what I think. You think it's because of that?
Yeah, something like that. And also, again, like you don't get to learn that kind of back and forth conversation where, you meet in the middle, maybe some of your needs are being heard and there's some compromise. It's kind of like, no, there's no time for that. We're just going to do what I say. And again, too, when I say earlier that this is like high control, high demands, but then low warmth. So you're not getting that emotional warmth, that kind of like loving environment. And that's also, I think, leads to, again, some of those outcomes of having like lower self-esteem. And then oftentimes what happens is that children in these environments can grow up feeling anger and resentment towards their parents as they get older, but then they never feel safe enough to express those feelings to their parents. And then sometimes you might think, okay, like I understand why my parents raised me this way. Sometimes parents do this out of necessity, depending on their situation. But, kids don't feel safe enough to have those conversations because that emotional warmth wasn't there and wasn't fostered in these relationships.
And I feel like also like with a kind of immigrant parents too. I think we've spoken about this a little bit, that we tend to see this a bit more, and I imagine out of necessity. To you're in a new country, you're getting accustomed to everything there, and you want your kids to be kind of following the rules in a new country.
Yeah, I think if I like to watch like comedy and things like that, and I think a lot of like individuals of color who grew up with immigrant parents, like they'll joke about their parents being sounding very authoritative. And I think you're definitely right. Like in some environments where, immigrant families, for example, where you're in a new country, maybe you don't have a big social support. So you really just want to make sure your kids just like follow directions out of safety or out of necessity, out of having, a lack of support or social network. So sometimes people, I don't think people who end up parenting this way are necessarily mean or trying to be like mean to their children, but maybe it's out of stress or again like not having that some of the social supports that they need in order to like to parent, because parenting, as you said, is really hard and it takes a village, which I think a lot of people often say.
Yeah, it's stressful.
Yeah, definitely. Also, one last thing we'll point out is that sometimes what happens in these environments where the parent is very authoritarian is that children learn how to be good liars. So they know how to avoid punishment in order to, again, to avoid that angry outcome if they don't follow directions. So that's also a potential side effect to this type.
Yeah, sounds like it could definitely have a lot of negative outcomes. And so another type of parenting style that we'll be talking about is a subset of authoritarian parenting, and that's overparenting. It's also known as helicopter parenting and lawnmower parenting, which is actually, I'll admit, a new term that I just learned from Michelle today. I wasn't familiar with it. I'm familiar with helicopter parenting, but apparently lawnmowers is a synonym for that. It's another term for it. And so with over-involved or over-parenting, these parents, they hover over their child. So I think that's why helicopter is a good analogy to use for that. They rescue them from the world. They typically take too much responsibility for their children's experiences and specifically their successes or their failures. And so they have this intense focus and overprotective style that can negatively impact a child's mental health, their self-image, their coping skills. And this type of parenting style, you could see it presented in a few different ways. As parents taking on the child's responsibilities. So you think about the parent who does the homework for their child, the parent who writes their essays for them. They're taking on that responsibility and they're doing that for them. Parents protecting their children from any possible negative feelings. So I think about the trigger warning if it's excessive and it's that's very triggering for my child, and if it's something that you're constantly talking about where everything is very, very upsetting to your child and trying to protect them from ever having any kind of negative feelings. The parent uses actions and words that rescue the child, but indicate that the child is incapable or not responsible. When I read this, I get the sense that with children who are raised with this type of parenting style, they don't really develop those coping skills on their own because it's almost like their parents never gave them the chance to, like they never were able to.
Yeah. So, think of those parents who, they come in and they try to rescue their kid. So these children never get to experience, if you do your homework on your own and let's say you do poorly on your homework, but then you learn from that, right? That's like a natural consequence that you learn as a kid that maybe try again and you'll do better next time. But if you take away that experience and you continue to take away that experience, and parents can never fully remove a child from feeling badly or from having a negative experience or from experiencing failure. That's just kind of like life. When you do that and this person then does experience that negative experience or their first failure, then like their feelings are just amplified and it's almost like not, proportionate to whatever the situation is because they've never had that chance to kind of like, get some grit or, build their resilience, which again is necessary and during childhood to kind of like learn how to build that resilience. That one little setback isn't going to destroy you, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a really good way of putting it. Is that it allows your children going through difficult experiences won't break them. It builds that resilience, and so I think that's something that the kids of the helicopter parents are really missing. So the result of overparenting can often result in a child who grows up highly anxious, fearful, with underdeveloped coping skills and poor self-esteem. So like Michelle was just saying, those underdeveloped coping skills because they haven't had the opportunities to develop that resilience that comes from those negative experiences and those failures.
Right, right. So another parenting style is something called permissive parenting. So think the cool mom. I think a very prime example of this is Mean Girls is a very classic movie. So think
Mhm.
Regina George's mom who like lets her
I'm a
have the
cool
master
mom.
bedroom. Yeah, like I'm a cool mom. We don't have any
Yeah.
rules kind of thing. So
Mhm.
permissive sorry, I just thought of that movie and it just makes me laugh.
Yeah, we do.
So, permissive parenting is the opposite of authoritarian and overparenting, like we just described earlier. So, these types of parents are characterized by high levels of warmth, which is good to be, having that emotional warmth, but very low levels of structure or discipline. So, these types of parents, you see them being very lenient, being like very, very forgiving. Usually they step in only if there's a serious problem. So they're very much, like hands off. And so these types of parenting styles can present in some of the following. So having few rules or few boundaries, which that in and of itself is going to lead to some problems. So parents are nurturing, but they lack that follow through. They don't often follow through with if there's going to be a consequence. So the child never like learns about that discipline or consequence. And then they have this very like, oh, kids will be kids, very like laissez-faire type attitude towards parenting. So in these situations where parents tend to be very permissive, I mean, they're very kind and loving towards their children, but the lack of boundaries, the lack of consequences, the lack of just parenting, really, and lack of setting limits often has unintended consequences. So, what tends to happen is that children in these environments tend to not be able to develop that respect. They may not know how to interact, with others and adults because they're not learning the boundaries that you naturally have to have when you build a relationship with anybody. Picture again, like if we go back to Mean Girls, like remember how Regina George behaved. She's very, I guess spoiled, you would say. She's not, she wants her way and that's it. She doesn't really have a lot of respect for other people's feelings and their needs. It's all about like her needs. She's kind of like seen as a selfish person. So that's a very exaggerated example, but you can see how not setting limits, not having boundaries, not teaching those kinds of things early on kind of like leads this, a person's going to develop into someone who doesn't then have doesn't respect boundaries or limit setting with others and other relationships that they're going to have.
Yeah, and I would think that also impacts the way that they interact with other authority figures because if their parents, like that's like the first authority figure in your life, if they're not setting those boundaries, then maybe, do you think this would be the kind of kid who's like talking back to the teacher a lot in class?
Yeah, those kind of kids where you're just like, wow, that person's like really disrespectful. And then often too, like think like the adults who maybe like have a lack of respect for like police or authority figures or following the rules in general that every society needs to function because you never got to develop those skills in your childhood.
And so the fourth kind of parenting style we'll be discussing is uninvolved parenting, so neglectful parenting. So this is much more harmful than the other ones that we've been speaking about. This is being emotionally and physically detached. These type of parents, they have little knowledge about what their child is doing. And this may not always be intentional. And so it's not just parents who don't care necessarily. These parents could be really struggling with their own issues. They could have substance abuse issues. They could have mental health issues. They could be just overwhelmed by so many other problems. I think about the mom who has 4 or 5 kids and 3 jobs and is just trying to just get the rent paid and just put food on the table. And so in those cases, you don't have the honestly kind of the luxury of the time to really be able to take to do some of these things. And you're just trying to get by. And so this type of parenting style, it can present in a few different types of ways. Like I said earlier, they rarely know where their child is or who they're with. They don't likely know their friends. These parents set few rules or limits for the child. And it's not that they set few rules because they're like the cool mom parent who are just trying to be kind of friends with their kids. They don't have the time or just the mental bandwidth to be able to do that. The child doesn't receive a lot of guidance or nurturing or parental attention. So these aren't the parents who are checking their kids' homeworks. They're not checking their grades. the child is expected to kind of raise themselves and maybe even take responsibility for younger siblings. I'm trying to think of in the media situation like this where you have, if you just think about a parent who's really, really overwhelmed and has a lot going on, and then the older child is then taking responsibility and acting as the mother or father figure to their younger siblings. That's what I'm talking about here.
Yeah. And then the parent, I'm sorry, not the parent, the child is what we call parentified, right? So you think if there's multiple children, the oldest child is the one that's kind of almost acting like the mother or father figure, kind of acting like the parent basically for their younger siblings, being overly responsible, if anything, because they kind of don't have a choice. I think you see it in both ways. You'll see a parent who maybe they have, 2 jobs, 3 jobs, trying to pay the bills. And so that's why they're absent. On the opposite end, not just, the mom, a single mom who's maybe struggling to put food on the table, working multiple jobs, but I think you see the uninvolved parent and even a wealthy family. So think a family who they're high earning, but they're off jet setting or going to conferences or working a lot. And that's why they're uninvolved.
When you say that, I actually think about the show Succession, the HBO show was on the air until recently. So that's a very, very wealthy family where the mother is completely detached. I think she lives in France, maybe. She lives in another country and she has completely her own life. And then the father, who's in charge of the company that the kids all want to succeed him, hence Succession. They all want to succeed him. And he's completely not involved in their lives personally. He's all about his business. And he's always been just all about running this very, very successful business and was very, just not there for them. And the relationship that they have with their father is not a loving or warm relationship at all. They kind of were parented. Actually, I think they were parented by a nanny, I think.
So these types of kids end up finding a parental figure in others, maybe, right? Like a nanny or maybe a neighbor or their friends' parents, things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so with this type of parenting style, we can definitely see how that could be harmful to children and their development. Children of this parenting style, they tend to struggle with self-esteem issues. So that's a theme that you've been hearing in these other parenting styles that we've spoken about too. They may perform poorly in school and they may exhibit behavioral problems because, again, they don't have those boundaries. They don't have that supervision. They don't have that warmth. They're missing all of those elements that are needed for effective parenting.
Yeah. And sometimes too, when you see acting out in children, it's a cry for help. That's kind of however you're going to get attention, even if it's in a negative way, is better than no attention. And that's often what happens in neglectful situations. All right. So we talked about some not so great parenting styles. So then what is the parenting style that is recommended?
Give us a little hope in parenting. Give us something positive here.
So the recommended parenting style is something called authoritative parenting. So not to be confused with authoritarian, it's authoritative. So authoritative parents, they strike that balance between warmth and control and support and proper discipline. So they show warmth and kindness and love to their children, but they also set limits. They also set boundaries. They have rules. So they respect their kids' individuality and they parent with the goal of, raising well-rounded, independent, well-adjusted people. And actually, so authoritative parenting, again, it's a parenting style. And some of if people ever purchase parenting books, and you might hear things like gentle parenting or attachment style parenting, all of the good parenting recommendations and things like that all kind of stem from authoritative parenting. So again, this is kind of the parenting that's the ideal state. So the way this type of parenting style may present would be you have a parent who sets clear expectations, they enforce the rules consistently. They give their kids age-appropriate autonomy. So they're not kind of letting them do whatever they want, in a maybe overly permissive or even neglectful setting. It's all age-appropriate. So they're kind of aware of, okay, my kid is 5, so I'm going to parent this way versus, my kid is 12, so I can give them more responsibility. And then with this type of parenting, there's also open communication. So it's not like with authoritarian where it's what I say goes. There is that opportunity, again, based on a child's stage and development, on having that back and forth, having conversation, hearing out the child's needs. There's a rationale to their discipline. So it's not like it's what I say goes and that's it. There is room for negotiation based on what's appropriate. And they tend to foster self-confidence, social skills, emotional regulation. They, as parents, also try to model what it looks like to do a good job or what their expectations are. So it's not just about like, hear what I have to say and follow it. It's also they're modeling that appropriate behavior, the behavior that they want their children to also take on. And they also let their child experience life's natural consequences. So they're not doing their homework for their child. If their child doesn't do well on like a test, for example, then they let their child experience those natural consequences and build resilience and grit, as they grow up.
It kind of sounds to me like they allow their kids to go through life's failures, but they provide that safety net to help them through those feelings, those negative feelings, if and when they experience them, instead of the neglectful one who's just like not even there, or the helicopter one who's even trying to prevent the child from even experiencing those negative feelings.
Correct, right? They strike that again. That's it's about that balance, right? Like you have the warmth, and you're there for your child. You talk to them, and then you also set boundaries. If they do experience a consequence in life, that's fine. But you're there to pick them up when they're sad and kind of help them like learn like what can you do better next time. Yeah. So research has shown that children who are raised in these authoritative environments tend to become responsible. So I think you can kind of see how, that's probably the outcome. They end up becoming well-adjusted adults. They're not afraid to express their opinions. They're able to make decisions on their own. They have higher self-confidence. And just in general, these children tend to be happier and more successful. They do well in school. And when they become adults, they're able to express their opinions without fear. So this is kind of the parenting style that has the best outcomes. And again, if you purchase like a parenting book in general that's giving you like parenting advice, it's probably kind of coming from this, authoritative type model in terms of like other kind of like parenting books.
Okay, so that's all that we have for today's episode on parenting. We hope you enjoyed it. I'm Dr. Adeline Leon, licensed clinical psychologist.
And I'm Michelle Young, licensed clinical social worker.
And if you enjoyed our show on parenting, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel so you can receive notifications when we release our episodes. And we would love to hear from you in the comments. Did you know about these parenting styles? Have you heard of them? Have you encountered any of these types of issues in your parenting? And if there are any other topics related to parenting that you'd like us to cover, definitely let us know. We're really open to ideas about topics for shows. So if there's ever anything that you'd like us to cover, let us know in the comments, and we would love to hear that from you.
And thanks so much for tuning in to Mental Health Merienda, your snack-sized guide to mental health wellness. So we'll see you soon.
Bye.